And I think that one of the very important concepts in taking things to the next level is understanding, not just understanding, but accepting and maybe even celebrating that resistance is part of that journey. So as we see that resistance, that could be an exciting moment. It could be an awesome moment. It could be an area where we go, oh, wait, something cool's about to happen.
This is Andrew Petty is Dying, where we tap into the power of our mortality to become the people we were made to be and live the lives we were made to live. I'm your host, Andrew Petty, and I'm dying. I hate to say it, but so are you. This episode is a first for this podcast, a part 2 continuation of a previous episode. It features a fellow coach and my good friend, Chad James. And together, we're unpacking more of what I touched on in episode 27, Breaking the Stuckness Stalemate, a Path to Transformation. When I released that episode, I was vaguely aware that it felt unfinished somehow, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Then I got feedback from my wife and Chad that although they really liked the episode, it felt unfinished to them too. Chad specifically mentioned that the 5 basic ingredients and the recipe for using stuckness to our benefit was the part he wanted to hear more about. That connected the dots for me on what felt unfinished and what needed to be done about it. And since I've been wanting to have Chad on the podcast for a while anyway, I decided to strike while the iron was hot, as it were, and kill 2 birds with 1 stone by asking Chad to join me to help land this plane that had been left circling the airfield. If you haven't already tuned into episode 27, you can still listen to this one first, because I summarized the big idea from that episode at the beginning of this one. But for full effect, I do recommend listening to episode 27 too. It's short and easy to digest at just 15 minutes. And in it, I pull back the curtain on one of my own recent episodes of Stuckness on the way to making the point. Now, without further ado, let's get to it. All right, let's do this, Chad. I'm here with Chad James, and we are in my living room studio, hoping that construction doesn't kick off again across the street. Thankfully, we've got frigid temps, and I think the construction workers are holding off a little bit, and hopefully they'll hold off for just the right amount of time. Chad, welcome.
Hey, brother. Good to spend some time with you.
Ditto, for sure. And Chad is a good friend. He is a mentor of mine, especially in the coaching world, and has cut the corners for me on many, many learning curves when I began coaching 4 or 5 years ago. And Chad's been a small business coach for almost 20 years now, right?
A little over 20 years, yeah.
And really, to have been in coaching that long, you were among the pioneers in the field. That was sort of like when coaching was sort of becoming a thing. And I've got a lot of theories about why it became a thing when it did, and we'll save those for another time. But you've been in the game for a long time, helped a ton of small business owners, a ton of people. Do what? What's your tagline? Give me your tagline again.
Well, it's funny. When I started coaching, they didn't call it coaching. They just called it helping people.
Right.
One of the things that I do, or the thing that I guess I've built my practice on, is helping people succeed faster so they can live better and very specifically create the lives they've always imagined. That's been something that I see. I think a lot of people know how to build businesses. I think a lot of people know how to make money. But what I started to see years and years ago was this concept that people would make a lot of money. They would have this quote unquote, raging business, and they were just morbidly unhappy. So I find myself really happy when we can continue the growth pattern of the business and the trajectory, but we can get someone 11 or 12 weeks a year of vacation, or we can protect them from their email, or we can get them general managers and teammates that really do much of the heavy lifting for them so that they can really appreciate the spoils of what it is that they do.
That's awesome, because I think many of us can relate to having some success in life, but in many other areas of our lives, finding that we're really out of alignment, or the wheels are wobbly, or we're just not making the cut. And there are plenty of very smart people out there who are capable of standing up businesses and running businesses, and then very quickly find the business running them and many other parts of their lives in shambles. And it's easy to do that in our culture, where having success according to certain metrics is applauded and praised and valued, but you don't have to look very far into someone's life to find that the rest of it isn't doing so well. So you're doing amazing work. And Chad's been just an amazing serendipitous / providential person in my life since I got to Steamboats, and my family and I moved here in 2014. Among other things, in addition to just helping me climb the coaching learning curve, and I think you and I both would say coaching with a lowercase c, like you said earlier, it's really just helping people. And what we're trying to do is have conversations with people that help them move the ball further downfield in their own lives in whatever way is important to them. But we'll just use coaching as the broad category for what we do. In addition to help me climb some of those learning curves really quickly, you were the one who actually 2 years ago gave me the final kick in the butt to get the graveyard group up and running, and then were foolish or brave enough to join the first graveyard group that we started.
I think lucky enough is the word.
Which is what we now call the OG TGG.
That's right.
That group's still going strong and making a big difference in each of our lives. I'm a player coach in that group. He was the one that gave me the final kick in the butt to get that thing off and running. And now there are multiple groups and currently all men, and they're changing their lives in remarkable ways week to week with each other's support. And then you started you kind of took over running something that the local Young Professionals Network called Hype, which is a sort of a styled after TED Talks, and it's a local thing. And you asked me to come on and speak. And the topic for the previous episode 27, that this one is part 2 for, actually came from a tagline I developed for that first Hype Talk. I had 4 points, which I was calling at that time sort of navigational aids for life. One of them was if you want to change, find your why. If you're scared, practice being brave. If you're stuck, get moving. And if you're uncomfortable, good, get used to it. And it was this if you're stuck, get moving piece that I based episode 27 on.
Right.
And so in many, many ways that I'm sure are clear to you, listening today, Chad, is a big reason why you're listening to this topic today and why I'm doing what I'm doing. So publicly, hats off. Thanks to you, Chad, for all of your involvement in my life and inspiration and instigation, and just helping me get over some of those big humps that I needed to get through.
Well, I need to give you a tremendous amount of credit. I may have been catalytic in nature to a lot of this, but the ideas came from you, and the way that it works out comes from you. And I've received a tremendous amount of value both from our friendship. I consider you to be a mentor of mine as well, and the stuff that we do in OG TGG is probably one of my favorite days of the week. So thanks.
Awesome. Ditto. Thanks, man. And I'll share more about Graveyard Group in the show notes, as always, in case you're interested. And I'm excited to share later on in this episode a new project that Chad has going. And I'm excited that he's going to be offering listeners of this podcast a special opportunity, a bonus offer. So we'll get to that midway through. For those of you who didn't listen to episode 27 first, the good news is that, of course, you don't have to listen to that one to benefit from this one. I would encourage you to do that. But I'm going to summarize real quickly just sort of the big idea of that episode. And it's just around this idea of stuckness. And I called that episode Breaking the Stuckness Stalemate, A Path to Transformation. And the reason I called it that was because stuckness, as I said in that episode, is a normal and necessary part of life. And anytime we find ourselves to be stuck, whether it's for a few hours, a few days, even a few years, as I have on occasion, the stuckness is there for a reason. And changing the way we relate to that stuckness has everything to do with the role that it can play in our lives. And so learning to realize that when I'm stuck, it's an indicator on the dashboard of my life saying that, hey, there's a learning curve that you need to go up here. And the stuckness is telling you need to know something that you don't yet know. And when I first came up with that if you're stuck, get moving idea, it was because I had found so much value in my own life when I was stuck of literally getting physically moving, that when I found myself stuck mentally or emotionally or whatever it might be, often if I just got up off the couch, away from the desk, whatever, just changed my environment, it got the wheels turning again, and I could get some forward movement again. So that was sort of the genesis of it. But as I began doing episode 27 and I was literally in a stuck episode while I was creating that episode. And as I began to write that episode, I realized it's not just get moving, it's because that might communicate that we're meant to move away from the stuckness. And I realized, no, that's not really good. If I just move away from it, if I just distract myself from it, I'm not actually learning the lesson that stuckness is there to teach me. And so revision of that initial idea was to say, if you're stuck, get moving, but specifically get moving with and through the stuckness so you can learn the lesson. Be willing to pause and see what the stuck is there for, and then begin moving with and through it. And when we do that, we can gain the insight that the stuckness is there to teach us. It might be multiple insights. And then if we choose, we can apply action to that insight, and then we can experience some level of transformation in our lives. My two-part formula for transformation for us humans is simply insight plus action equals transformation. I think you could boil most, if not all, of the forward movement we make in life to that kind of a process. We gain some insight, we take some action, and we experience some kind of transformation. And with practice, we can learn to see the stuckness as an indicator rather than something to move away from or to avoid or to resist. Anything else from that episode, Chad, that comes up for you that you think would be useful by way of recap?
It's so important that we apply action to our stuckness. Matter of fact, I think if we had 17 steps in becoming unstuck, if one of those steps was action and that action was toward the resistance that we're feeling, we could probably eliminate most of the rest of the steps. Maybe they fine-tune it a bit for us, but that was something that I really keyed on from that episode is absolutely. I like, becoming familiar with the way that I respond and that I interact with stuckness. I love the idea of just acknowledging that I am stuck. Taking personal responsibility for it, super important. Tapping into and being with the stuckness and really spending time with it, kind of like the mean kid in the classroom, so to speak. I think that's important. But out of all of those things, this whole concept of applying action toward your stuckness, not running away from it, but action toward it, I think is probably, to me, the piece from the last episode that really stuck with me the most.
And I think there's a useful distinction between turning to face the stuckness to see what it's there for and asking, why am I stuck? Because the why question to me can become quicksand very quickly. And people spend years in therapeutic settings asking the why question and digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And by no means am I bad-mouthing therapy. I've spent plenty of time in therapy and gained a lot of value from it. But sometimes the why question can become an endless, bottomless pit and often becomes kind of blamey and can lead us to a victim-y place. Like, well, yeah, then this happened and that happened and this person this and this person didn't do that. And so the idea with turning to face our stuckness and taking action as a result of what we see is to go, what is this resistance or this stuckness showing me, telling me that I need to know differently?
Yeah, I think you're dead on. I think if we spend too much time on the why, let me back up. When we ask the question why and we try to find the answer, we're oftentimes trying to find one reason.
Yeah.
So that we can create this target that this is the reason and that's why it happened. And if I can just resolve that thing, then everything will be better. But really at the end of the day, there likely isn't just one why. There's many whys. And there's a piece of why A and why B and a little element of why C. Constantly trying to solve that equation, I think is oftentimes, I think it's great. I agree. I've spent a lot of time in therapy as well, and I like that. But one of the things that I love that my therapist does is he constantly says, okay, well, those whys are there, and they provide context for your new actions, so that you either don't get yourself in a situation like that, or you can use that as some form of lower part of the pyramid of growth and actualization, but it's just not as important as the action we take.
And yeah, I don't know about you, Chad, but I often find that there are patterns of stuckness that recur for me that are often triggered by similar events, at least in what they bring up in me, and they're pointing back thematically to something in my life that still needs to evolve. And each time like for me, it can be, I don't know, a sense of like inadequacy or whatever. And there are different events that can trigger that same sentiment that starts producing stuckness in me. And when I turn and face the stuckness, I can be, oh, wait, yeah, then this happened and that happened. And that started getting me in a weird headspace that's led me to this moment of stuckness, be it a bigger or a small one. And often thematically, the same thing is coming up again. And so if we find ourselves in patterns of recurring stuckness, it's good to go, what thematically is being pointed out for me? I wanted to add that a little bit, but now I want to move on to the 5 ingredients in the recipe that were at the end of episode 27 that both you, Chad, and my wife, Karis, pointed out. So the first recipe in the ingredient for making stuckness really work for us and help us transform is to become familiar with your own telltale signs of stuckness. And I mentioned that in my experience, some of the typical signs include irritability, distractedness, restless energy, a lack of focus, and loss of a sense of humor. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think those are relatively standard, if you will. I think a lot of people that go through stuckness have things like that. In particular, some of these, the concept of losing an idea as to where you're headed, that distractedness. a telltale sign for me that I am stuck or that I might be heading towards stuckness is I will tend to distract myself away from the thing that I'm stuck on. As a matter of fact, I may even try to talk myself out of it. I may even try to tell myself that it's a bad idea or that it just doesn't make any sense, and try to use this logical brain piece of me to justify my way out of it. I think that is relatively typical for people when they're stuck. I think another area that people can really take a look at acknowledging and becoming familiar with is, what is the emotion that comes up most often? And I think of it more psychosomatically. So number one, what do I feel? Am I afraid? Am I sad? Am I maybe even overly excited sometimes? But then how does that reflect itself in my body psychosomatically? For me, when I find myself getting stuck, I'll find it almost directly center in my chest. I'll have more of a kind of a lack of breath kind of thing going on. I'll also find it in kind of base of my neck, rear base of my neck, kind of a pressure. Those over the years for me have become indicators that that's a resistance that I probably should lean into, whether I like it or not. So for me, a lot of that stuff comes up out of almost a worthiness spot. Is it worth it? Is it worth it? Am I worth it? So yeah, I think that is super important though, because when we aren't familiar with how we react in situations, then every time a certain reaction or a certain feeling or a certain emotion comes up, it will more than likely stop us. So for bungee jumping, I don't know if you've ever bungee jumped.
Not yet.
I've bungee jumped and I liked it. I liked it a lot. And, the first time you go up and you're staring over a cliff and, there's 500 feet below you and this little cord hanging on and some guy from New Zealand telling you it's going to be all right, mate. Having a little PTSD from that first jump. But, you're thinking about all the reasons you shouldn't go do it. But then, so you have an elevated heart rate. You maybe get sweaty palms. You're thinking about all the things that could happen. This thing could snap. Did the guy put the thing on right? Blah, blah, blah. And the next time you do it, you have a little bit less of that because you've experienced it once. And by the time you've done your fourth or your fifth time, and I did 5 jumps in one day, all of a sudden, I've become completely familiar with the way that my body's going to react in that situation. And becoming familiar with the way my body's going to react or familiar with the way my brain's going to react helps me understand that I can do something with that information. It's not a surprise.
There's so much there. The psychosomatic piece, I'm glad you brought that up because that's something I would love for our listeners to take away from this, is to know often stuckness shows up in ways that we can't engage first with our brain. It's happening to our bodies. Becoming more aware in the moment that it's beginning to happen allows us to actually tap in to the benefit of the stuckness. But when we haven't trained ourselves that way, those unpleasant physical sensations are just a trigger often to perform some behavior that we're accustomed to doing to get away from that discomfort.
Absolutely. The analogy I would make is, I lift a lot of weights and I know when I go in and I put weight on the rack and I'm about to lift it, and maybe it's a little heavier than I've lifted before, maybe I'm pushing something. I know that there's a difference in pain that is real and that is that says to me maybe I shouldn't lift so much weight, and pain that is more anticipatory in nature. That's more, maybe I could find a way to make my back hurt a little bit here before I lift this thing, or maybe that. And so I think it's really important to understand when those feelings, when those emotions, again, that psychosomatic stuff, when that pops up, what is real and stuff we should listen to in terms of stopping, slowing down, backing off, and what is real that we should listen to that says it's okay. For example, I know you exercise a lot and you've lifted weights and you do things. Soreness is not a reason not to lift weights. It might in fact be a reason to lift weights more. Pain is different. And so understanding which one of those feelings is actually with you right now is super important to determining what to do with it.
And that's why it's so important that when stuckness shows up, we are growing in our ability to go, oh, wait, it's happening. And then to turn and look at it and go, what's it there for? Because to your point, like some moment of stuckness might actually be telling you that there's danger ahead in some way. Maybe it's, not physical danger, but maybe you're in danger of getting into a bad business relationship, or maybe you're in danger of saying something really dumb to your life partner that's going to really wreck some things. So sometimes the warning sign, stuckness is there to tell us, whoa, put on the brakes, proceed with caution, or don't proceed, go a different direction. But until we've begun to train ourselves to see those psychosomatic indicators, those mood indicators as useful warning signs, and we stay in that fight or flight response to it, we're not going to learn the lesson, and we're going to repeat that pattern. And, talk about, one of the great efficiencies and areas of effectiveness in life to gain would be, gosh, how can I register when it's happening and do that more often so that I can learn the lesson and the benefit of that stuckness when it's showing up more often. I mean, that'll take you up a huge learning curve in life that you wouldn't otherwise be able to go up if you stayed in sort of that fight or flight response to it.
Totally. Yeah. When I was training for bike races, I'd go on long bike rides, 2 hours, 3 hours, and there was always 25 to 30 minutes at the beginning of the ride that I just wanted to stop riding. And what I started to learn over time as I rode these longer rides is that maybe that 25 or 30 minutes was just a thing that was always going to happen. And so it wasn't necessarily something to A, be afraid of, or B, do anything about other than be with.
Right. Great point, because sometimes we can think I've got to fix this discomfort somehow, when in fact the discomfort is just a necessary phase.
It's just a thing
to get where you want to go. Mm-hmm. Hey, let's tie in Stephen Pressfield's concept of resistance that he first brought out in War of Art. At least that was where I was first exposed to it.
Yep, same.
Because we're both big fans of his work and of how he talks about this concept of resistance. And if you've never read his book or tapped into any of his resources, I would encourage you to do so. He's an author by trade, and so much of what he's written in the War of Art applies specifically to people in the stereotypically creative fields of fine art or writing or those kinds of things, but it applies broadly to the human species and the human experience. And he's speaking primarily to the form of resistance that shows up when you're trying to bring something new and creative into the world, especially that brings a new level of exposure and vulnerability and perceived risk. So essentially saying, I'm bringing my creative baby into the world and asking everybody whether or not they think that my baby's cute. So unpack that a little bit, this idea of resistance and how it relates to stuckness.
Yeah, I've been reading Pressfield for a long time, and actually a long time ago, a mentor turned me on to War of Art, and I didn't get it at first. I said, I'm not a writer, I'm not a creative, it's not really the thing that I do, and he just kind of kept on me to kind of keep reading, and he was a much more intellectual guy than I am, much like you are much more intellectual than I am, and he said, just keep reading and try to find the simplest point. And the simplest point that I came out of with reading War of Art, which now is on my reading list, it is my number one book that I recommend to clients and friends, is this: the area that you find resistance is the area that you should lean into. And so as we bump up against resistance, as we see it, that should give us a sense that that is the very particular direction that we should be headed. And that from Pressfield was so important to me. The idea that resistance can be this amazing indicator for you to say, yep, you're on the right path, bro. You just got to keep heading down that way. So that's a biggie for me in the Pressfield piece. Pressfield wrote another book. He's written many books, obviously. Another book called Turning Pro, which is one of the elements in War of Art. War of Art talks first about this concept of amateur work and what it looks like, and then he transitions the second half of the book into this concept called Turning Pro, which is about taking things to the next level. And I think that one of the very important concepts in taking things to the next level is understanding, not just understanding, but accepting and maybe even celebrating that resistance is part of that journey. So as we see that resistance, that could be an exciting moment. It could be an awesome moment. It could be an area where we go, oh wait, something cool's about to happen. Let me lean into this a bit more.
That reminds me of Ryan Holiday's book, The Obstacle is the Way, and how the Stoic thinkers talk about the idea of resistance using their own language. Especially, I don't know if it's unique to our generation or not, but in the modern world, we're looking for ways around. We're looking for hacks. We're looking for the way to get somewhere quicker and faster. And maybe that has really done some damage to us psychologically, emotionally, everything, and that we've lost some of the capacity to recognize that the obstacle is the way. That resistance, like you said, is maybe a clue that something really exciting is getting ready to happen rather than I need to fix something because it's broken.
I think one of the most damaging phrases that anyone brought up ever is this concept of work smarter, not harder. And while I think that as a principle, it's sound, I believe that hard work or the hard way is often right, almost always right. That doesn't mean that if you, picking up stones one by one couldn't be helped by grabbing a shovel and picking them all up at once. But the concept of doing the harder thing, I think, really appeals to our psyche. The idea that we can do hard things and that hard things are, in fact, good. You built houses. You've done many, many hard things, whether it's athletic things, climbing the top of Mount Kilimanjaro when you thought you were going to die the whole way, whatever it might be. All of a sudden, when we realize that doing the hard thing feels good, in particular after we've accomplished or after we've finished, then all of a sudden we don't seek the path of least resistance all of the time. I think the path of least resistance is great for tasks and systems and processes and all these day-to-day things that we have in life. But when it comes to making meaningful change to ourselves, our psyche, our behaviors, I believe that the hard way is often the right way.
And, philosophers and spiritual thinkers and great minds and just regular minds throughout the ages have always talked about paradox and how there's so much power in paradox. I think that's part of what you're pointing out here is that, like Ryan Holiday, the obstacle is the way. And you're saying, whenever you find resistance, move toward it, lean into it. And the more I do this podcast, it's not intentional, but I keep realizing the concepts that I'm bringing to the table always have paradox in them.
Yeah.
Because in paradox it appears to be the most precious truth. If you're scared, practice being brave. I really think that there's a lot of truth in that, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We would prefer to say, if you're scared, figure out how to not be scared.
Right.
When in fact, the way to not be scared as much or as often is to practice being brave. You build bravery muscles and just the power of paradox in our lives. So this is another one of those. If you are starting to encounter resistance or stuckness, don't turn away from it and try to make it go away. Instead, turn and face it. And that really leads us into the second point, or the second ingredient in the recipe for using stuckness to our benefit. And this is how I stated it in episode 27. The second ingredient is to acknowledge that you're stuck and invite the stuckness to teach you. This acceptance will create the openness of heart and mind that allows the unconscious to be made conscious. Don't fight it or try to muscle your way past it. Resistance or avoidance or sheer force of will makes the stuckness an enemy rather than a useful mentor. What do you think of that?
I like that. I think the faster we acknowledge, and not necessarily fast in terms of time, but fast in terms of energy, the faster we energetically acknowledge that something is wrong, instead of avoiding or denying or wishing it wasn't, et cetera, the faster we can begin to take action toward fixing it. And often that action toward fixing it has, just like you said, it has nothing to do with directly moving at the problem all the time. It may have to do with just moving toward it. We don't have to be so direct toward it. So if I had cancer, we have a friend that has cancer. And when he found out that he had cancer, kind of accidentally, he was having headaches and going through some, kind of unusual stuff. The fact that he was able to catch it when he caught it allowed both him and doctors to begin thinking about doing something about it sooner. And grown men, a lot of guys listening are probably in their 30s, 40s, 50s even. We tend, over the years, we've tended to kind of ignore things for hope that they would go away. And that may be because we may have even had some experience with that happening. We may have said, oh, well, this pain happens and I just ignore it for a while and it goes away. But more often than not, what happens when we ignore it or we don't acknowledge it is it tends to get worse. And whatever that might be. And that doesn't, I don't take a hypochondriac's approach to life by any means. But I think that the concept of something is wrong, I should acknowledge it, I should sit with it a little bit, understand where it's coming from, maybe not worry so much about that and instead move toward the things that I think might alleviate it or that might help me become better at it, something along those lines. So I think that acknowledging it, that saying, yeah, it's there, I'm stuck, is a super important part of getting through it.
And I found that if I fail to acknowledge the telltale signs that I'm in some beginning stages of stuckness and turn toward it, then I start exhibiting all kinds of behaviors that are in response to that stuckness. I don't actually successfully move away from it and avoid it. I start living my life in avoidance of it. And so it is still operating within my life. And especially for me, the anxiety challenge I've had for so many years, when it gets that anxious edge to it, like Karis, my wife, will know when one of the telltales for me is I'll start cleaning the house feverishly. I mean, like baseboards. I mean, how often do you touch baseboards? Not probably often enough. We don't, but I mean, I'll start doing that kind of stuff from top to bottom of the house, or start working on house projects because I've got all of this energy suddenly within me that I'm not managing very consciously.
Yeah.
And if I'm willing to stop and just sit in it for a moment and go, what is happening? Just ask that question. What is happening? Then I can usually begin to piece together the origin of this episode and what it's trying to tell me. And as nice as I think as it would be to think that we could, okay, here's the stuckness. Oh, and I'm going to pause and acknowledge it, and it's going to teach me. We're going to move on from that forever and ever. Amen. It would be awesome to think that. But I found more often than not, each episode, there's often a common theme that recurs throughout them, and we get the opportunity to move a little bit further downfield with that.
Yep.
We evolve a little bit further, we mature a little bit further in that area if we're willing to do the work in that moment of stuckness and resistance. So I don't want listeners to think that, hey, if I can just master this stuckness thing, which again is sort of that life hack mentality, like I'm just going to, okay, show me the trick.
Give me the 5 steps, Andrew.
Here's the steps. But instead to realize this is not so much a tactic or a strategy as it is an approach to life. And we can refine our ability to exercise this approach, which will then lead to more highly functioning muscles in this area that leads to better growth. So if you've listened to this podcast, more than a few episodes, you know that typically, while there may be some tips and things in there, these are some of the deeper digs in life that get us some of the deeper wins. And the reason I spend a lot of time there is, number one, nature. It's just kind of how I'm made, the kind of human I am, but also because when we get success in these areas, we get success in so many other areas. I mean, how many business owners have you worked with where, they're stuck maybe on some profitability or some, they're trying to build some more margin into their life or into their business, and they succeed in doing so, but not because they rearranged their schedule. It was because they did what? For example,
they typically took some form of action toward it. They acknowledged where it's coming from. They understood it. It's funny. I always say with a coaching client that the real work begins when we stop talking about their profit and loss statement. And because there tends to be simple answers to things like profit. Profit's a really easy equation. Make more money than you spend, and then you have profit. And once we can start moving past that and we say, okay, well, what's stopping you from not checking your email constantly? Why can't you check your email only at 8, 12, and 4 today? Okay, well, what's wrong there? And where does that come from? And what's the presumption, or what are the limiting beliefs that you've created to say that I have to be constantly available, and why can't you take longer vacations to different places? And why can't you pay more for a consultant or an employee that will help you more? Where does all that come from? Once we acknowledge it, I think it really, really moves us toward solving the problem. I have a client that makes a lot of money, and like a lot of money, $1 million a year personally kind of thing. And he was having a hard time just trying to generally accept adding team members to his team. And I said to him, if you only made $750,000 last year, but were able to have 3 people come on and help you solve problems, how valuable would that be to you? And all of a sudden, it was like a light bulb went on, and he went, wait a second. I've always used money as a marker, or I've always used, and again, I'm using money as an example here, but I've always used something as a marker. When I recognize that marker is no longer relevant, then I can make decisions differently. And I think that's a huge piece of some of this too. So I've always used pain as a marker, not to lift heavier weight. Well, what if I recognize that pain is not an appropriate marker? I mean, acute pain, yes, but generalized soreness and pain, and maybe that's not a great marker. And once I recognize that, then when I go in, I went in this morning and I'm on a particular program that has me lift weights to failure. And I was feeling a little bit puny this morning. And then I went, oh, wait a second. Feeling a little bit puny and feeling a little bit sore has almost always been a recipe for me having a great workout, because I've done it over and over again now. So it doesn't go away. And I think that's something that's really key, that what you said earlier is, it's not as if the triggers or as if the psychological stuff, it's not as if any of that ever goes away. It's just that we understand and acknowledge that it's a response that we typically have. Therefore, we can move past it faster.
And as we're more willing to engage each of those moments of stuckness or discomfort, or no matter how it might show up, and that's kind of why I like the term stuckness, because it's sort of a broad umbrella statement for any form of discomfort we might experience in life, or fear or inadequacy. It can create stuckness. The more we engage these moments meaningfully, turn toward the stuckness and ask it what it's there for, and create that openness of heart and mind that allows the unconscious to be made conscious. This is mental and emotional and spiritual weightlifting that fundamentally increases our capacity to do life more productively, more enjoyably, and more meaningfully. If there's anything that life teaches us, is that it's unpredictable, and it's uncertain. The illusion of control is just that. It's an illusion. We can't really control it, in my opinion.
Totally.
And so doing this work now increases this musculature that allows us to have more capacity to deal with whatever life brings us coming forward, and or to lean into the things that we really want to achieve. You want to start a business, you want to do a hard physical thing, then turn and face the stuckness when it shows up, because it's there for a reason. And it will make the unconscious conscious and allow you to grow. I think this is as good a time as any, Chad, because I really want to hear from you, and I want the listeners to hear about your new project that you're calling Mavericks. What is that? How can we find out about it? Who's it for? Tell us about it.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I've been coaching for a long time, a little over 20 years, and I've always been a one-on-one coach. In fact, for a long, long time, it was literally the only way that you could work with me. And over the years, two things have happened. Number one, it's become relatively expensive. It costs somewhere between $25,000 and $35,000 a year just to start coaching with me on a one-on-one basis. And I've found that I've created over the years this gigantic kind of warehouse of information and tips and techniques and mindsets that are really not helping a lot of people at once. I work with somewhere between 8 and 12 one-to-one clients at a time. And so a few years ago, I said, well, let me distill some of that into a newsletter. And you know about the newsletter. It's called Small Biz Profit Builders. And it was a paid subscription newsletter. And it was fun for me to write it and fun for me to spend time with it. But I didn't get quite as much interaction either from the subscribers or amongst the subscribers themselves. And so this concept of having a membership group, having a movement, if you will, of people who are all thinking about this concept of becoming more free. And I don't mean free from a political standpoint. I mean free from a time, money, energy perspective. That just never went away for me. It just always was just sitting right there. Like, Chad, you got to do something. You've got all this information. You've got all this stuff. You've got to do something right there. And so with the help of my coach, Wayne, as well as my therapist, as well as the guys in Graveyard Group, I put Mavericks into motion. And the concept of a maverick is a person who kind of does it their own way, who carries their own brand. Instead of trying to do it, Stephen Pressfield's way or Warren Buffett's way or somebody's way, they maybe take lessons from that, but they essentially do it their own way. And so Mavericks is really a movement toward freedom. And it's a coaching group. It meets once per week. It's a call. I typically do 4 calls a month. The first call is introducing a coaching concept, giving a coaching assignment, letting people go and spend time on that. The second call tends to be one of my 5 conditions for freedom, which are sovereignty, purpose, commitment, action, and discipline. And those are, to me, those are the ways that as you master each of those or get closer to mastery, you're moving closer towards creating the own freedom for yourself. The third week is typically a case study. And in the fourth week, I select one member to do some one-on-one coaching, 1 or 2 members to do some one-on-one coaching with on the call. And then when we're not doing calls asynchronously, we have an online group and a way that they can communicate with one another. And so, yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. And if you guys are interested in that, you and I talked about it. It's not expensive. It's about $100 a month. But for your listeners and the guys that are interested that we know, I have a 25% off coupon for their first month, and we'll put that in the show notes. But basically, you go to carrynobrand.com. You can click on the Join Mavericks button, and then at the checkout, enter code Andrew. And that'll give them 25% off their first month of membership.
Nice. That's awesome. And this is hot off the presses, so to speak, because you really just launched it, right?
Last week.
But there's nothing new really about the content you'll receive, because this is the fruit. I don't mean that in a way that it is totally a new context, but you have been distilling the wisdom that you're going to impart in this group for the past 20 years.
Yeah. One of the things that I found was that, and one of the catalyst towards making this happen was I found that I had, terabytes of information that I had gathered over the years, whether it was a spreadsheet on how to work your finances, or it was a worksheet on developing your vision, or something about mindset, or maybe I had exercises or videos or audios. I literally had like tapes, like old Tony Robbins tapes that I would grab pieces from. So I've decided to kind of make that all available. And it was just really important for me to kind of get it out into the world.
Now, I've mentioned this to you privately, but just to share with the group, Chad's an example of a guy who I think is ripening, and because of the work he's been doing for the number of years that he's been doing it and the quality with which he's been doing it, he's now at a point where he kind of is ripe fruit for others to pick. He's got these distilled bits of wisdom and strategies and techniques and ways to approach life that are ready for others to have access to. And, you've had to put in those 20 years to get to the point where that can be available in the way you're now making it available. So I'm super psyched for what you're doing. I'm psyched for everyone who's going to be involved. I'm personally going to be involved, and enjoy and really look forward to benefiting from and contributing to this group of people who are interested in creating even more freedom from themselves. And as Chad mentioned in the show notes, they'll have links to this. And also links to how to find Chad as a one-on-one coach, and just to get connected with him and what he's doing in the world. And the code again is Andrew when you go to carrynobrand.com and click to sign up for Mavericks. You'll just enter the code Andrew. So really excited for what you're doing, and looking forward to the ways it's going to help and being involved in it. Thanks,
brother.
Chad.
Appreciate it.
And I will, of course, include more information about how to connect with Chad in the show notes, just generally, even apart from Mavericks. Well, let's keep moving to conclude these 5 ingredients in our recipe for making stuckness work for us. The third ingredient that I mentioned in the previous episode was take 100% responsibility for your stuckness. It's your problem, no one else's. Request help from others, friends, experts, a therapist, whomever, or whatever seems appropriate to the situation, but retain full ownership of the problem and the solution. And this is a big deal, I think, a big, big, big deal. I actually think that if we were able to take 100% responsibility for ourselves 100% of the time, and take appropriate responsibility for others 100% of the time, most of the world's ills, at least in the way that humanity relates to itself, will go away.
Oh man, I agree with you. If only it was that. I think it is that simple.
It's that simple. It's just
if only it was that easy, right? I agree with that. I think that taking responsibility it's just gigantic. I don't suffer victimhood very well in my life, whether that's for myself or from people that I spend time with, and I think it has to do with a little bit with growing up as a child of a Air Force colonel. I can remember my dad when I was young, and I don't remember how old I was, but we moved around a lot in my life, and my dad was not particularly verbose. He didn't have a lot to say, but when he said it, it was important. And one of the things he said to me, probably somewhere in early high school, I can't remember exactly when, but, we had moved again and we were in another environment. I was lamenting something about how it was his fault that we moved and I didn't have any friends. And I remember my dad very specifically saying something along the lines of, son, nobody's coming to save you. You're going to have to figure this out. And while I'm certain that's created a lot of other therapy sessions for me, there's a lot about that I just recall. Like, hey, if you want a friend, you're going to have to walk up to someone and say, hey, I'd like to be friends. And if you want to have money in your pocket, well, then you should go get a job. And if you want to, date the pretty girls, then you should ask them out. There was a lot of this concept of, in my life of taking personal responsibility for where you're at. I think that taking responsibility for your own stuckness has a lot of that same flavor. The idea that, you're not going to just go and complain to your wife or complain to your buddies or complain to your mom and dad and have them just be like, well, son, here, let me just help you out with this. Or, oh gosh, honey, yeah, let me just do everything I can to make it easier. You're going to have to work your way through this. When I and you and I share, some anxiety. I had a very acute bout of anxiety, 2016. I remember just using my wife as my primary sounding board for this, and I remember one day my wife Sabrina looked me dead in the eyes and she said, "Honey, I am not and cannot get on this roller coaster with you. I'm not getting on this roller coaster with you." And she basically said, listen, this is you. You got to figure this out. And I thought that was great. She didn't abandon me, which is what I felt when she said it. But what she did was she gave me the power. She gave me the belief in me that I had what it took to move through it. And she made me take 100% responsibility for my stuff. And there's no greater gift than I've been given than those two things. Spent a lot of time in therapy talking to my therapist about that one too. But
I'm actually really glad that we keep talking about our therapist because number one, we dig our therapist. He's awesome. But also because I like for people to hear that people like you and me who are in a helping profession on a day-to-day basis, helping people make significant, substantial, life-changing movement. Spend time in therapy.
It's the whole reason I spend time in therapy, I think.
Because we're committed to figuring our own stuff out. And there are many times in which, many ways in which therapy is a great tool for that.
Yeah, without a doubt.
And when you are in our line of work, how we show up really matters. And so we are always, it always matters for all of us, but we want to be on our game when we show up and be as available to them as we can be. So, a shout out for the value of therapeutic work. And by the way, if you've never experienced coaching of a one-on-one nature, we are not therapists, most of us. Some are. More and more therapists are beginning to embrace sort of a coaching approach. But I find whether it's in the graveyard group or in one-on-one coaching, I hope I don't get banned from the ICF for this, but coaching is therapeutic. It produces therapeutic results, not because we are therapists or know how to employ certain methodologies from the realm of therapy or can prescribe anything, but simply because when you get into a meaningful conversation with another person where genuine listening is occurring, deep listening, and there's a genuine give and take exchange on an honest level, there's power in that connection that creates therapeutic effects. And so if you've never considered coaching as a way to accelerate yourself in life toward the things that you want, away from the things that are besetting you, I really would encourage you to do that, because many people think, well, I don't really need any, there's nothing really major going on right now, or I don't need that right now. And I'd say, well, all the more reason to go ahead and do it, because you can begin to move toward the things that you want. It's not, coaching can be used in moments of crisis, but it certainly is not specifically for moments of crisis. What Chad and I do is for helping you get where you want to go more quickly, become the person you were made to be, and live the life you're made to live. Stuckness creates collateral damage when we don't take responsibility for it. Sometimes, and I said in episode 27, there's a tremendous amount of pain associated with stuckness, especially when it's just happening to us and we're not actively in the moment trying to figure out what the stuckness is there for. And I did this recently with Karis, for Pete's sake. I'm working this stuff day in and day out, where I was realizing I was feeling mentally stuck about something, and I basically verbally turned and put that on her. That negative energy I was experiencing in the moment, I put it on her by just sort of vomiting it out. And it was harmful to her, and it was unkind of me. And I did it because I was experiencing some emotional and mental pain in the moment. And so the benefit of taking 100% responsibility for our stuckness is that we don't do any unnecessary collateral damage to relationships around us. And I bet any of you listening and I and you, Chad, could both think of bunches of people we know that on a daily basis do a lot of damage to each other, whether it's in a marriage or a sibling relationship or parent and child. Unintended damage, but damage nonetheless out of our own stuckness and the pain that comes along with it.
Yeah, I've always been a proponent, and not always a popular comment when I make it, but to remind people that your spouse is not your therapist. Spouse is not your coach. Your brother is not your therapist. Your brother is not your coach. I think it's really valuable to have those people in our lives to be able to bounce things off. But I don't know that they, meaning the other person, whoever that is, needs to be our regular go-to to vomit our crap. I think they're very helpful to help us think through it, but I think that we, again, have to take that personal responsibility. I put something on my Facebook this morning that I was thinking of, and it said, hey, this is what it said on the post. It said, if you're overthinking, you should go write. If you're underthinking, you should go read. And I think that oftentimes some of this stuckness, some of this is when we just get ourselves overthinking. And so instead of immediately moving towards a discussion and a conversation about it and trying to build allies, and I think oftentimes the best place to go is right down to the pad of paper or right into, whether it's talking something into your phone or whatever it might be, because I think that's a great first step toward taking personal responsibility. I know when I go into a session with my coach with some idea about how I can move through something, it's always a better session, even if we don't go with my idea. Same thing with my therapist. Same thing with my wife. If I can take that first step of responsibility and then enroll, it always seems to go better.
And then enroll support, yeah.
Exactly.
In a little bit more reasonable state of mind. You've already sort of circled the field to get an idea of what's going on. Even if you don't understand it, you've got a little bit of perspective on it. The fourth ingredient in this recipe is tap into the negative energy, frustration, anger, etc., to fuel positive forward movement through the stuckness. What do you think about that?
I think it's very important that whatever emotion comes from your stuckness or whatever emotion comes from this blockage or resistance that you found, I think it's important that you focus very specifically on that thing, whatever that is.
That emotion,
that somatic feeling.
Whatever the indicator is.
Whatever the indicator is, that you really kind of lean into that piece. And there's a concept in some forms of Buddhism, some Zen thought, even some forms of therapy, just this concept of being with. Just spending time, spending energy with whatever it is that's happening. For example, if you and I, and I'm not a proponent of trying to harm yourself, but if you and I were to go turn your stove on, turn your oven on, or no, your stove, sorry. I always forget which one's which. Go turn your stove on, and just leave the flame on medium. And we were to go over there and put our hand over the medium flame. Relatively quickly, we would move our hand away from that flame. Well, the fact of the matter is we could probably leave our hand there for a little bit longer, if not a lot of bit longer, without causing damage. And again, I'm not trying to say go put your hand on the flame, but to understand that we often move away far too quickly from the thing that is annoying us. So, for example, if we're going on a long bike ride, I'm going on a bike ride up a hill, and then all of a sudden I'm breathing hard, my legs are hurting, my lungs are, the sun is hot. I didn't wear the right shorts. It would be very easy for me to just turn around and say, I'm going to go fix all that before I go again. Or I could be with it. I could be with the pain. I could understand, and like we talked about before, I could understand that sitting with this literally helps me move through it. Even more literally on the bike, because that's one of the things that happens when you're riding a lot on the bike is your butt hurts and your legs hurt and things just hurt. And instead of trying to avoid that, just kind of being with it, all of a sudden, as we're with it, it starts to resolve itself. If you've ever noticed, one of the things we always try to do is we try to get away from pain. We try to get out of the bad mood, or we try to get out of something, whatever it might be. And oftentimes, so we're making all this effort toward it. And by the way, when I say effort, it's what you and I know. We're not doing a damn thing, really. We're just like thinking about how to get out of it. And
right.
da-da-da.
It's really reacting.
It's super reacting.
Yeah.
And so here's what I think about. Like, we know there have been times in our lives, or we all know, there have been times when we've been just blissfully happy. You can think about one right now. I could think about one right now. Well, that didn't stick around either. As much as we would like that to stick around and not leave, it still left. So what makes us think that a low emotion, or that something that is like a stuckness or an irritation or an anxiety, what makes us believe that's going to stay around forever when we can go to the other extreme? And so I think that has a lot to do with this concept of we just sometimes just have to be with it. One of the things, I had COVID earlier on this year, and the concept of, and I had it pretty badly. I was pretty sick, and the concept of completely stopping was just something that I was really resisting. I needed to make sure that I had phone calls going on. I made to make sure I had my client stuff lined out. And then as it turned out, COVID just decided that no, I wasn't going to get to do any of that. I was going to get to lay in bed for 16 or 17 hours or 18 or 25 hours a day. After a few days of recognizing that this was not going away and that it was okay to stop, all of a sudden my psyche cleared up. I felt better about the fact that I was just laying there doing nothing. And gosh, interestingly, I started feeling better about feeling bad, and it was okay. And so I think that just being with it and not resisting it the whole way and just letting it finish, letting it being the anxiety or the stuckness, just letting it finish a little bit is a great way to get us ready for the final step, which we're going to talk about, which is this concept of acting. But if we're constantly just fighting against it, fight, then we have no way to act our way out of it.
So interesting. You said, lay there doing nothing. And immediately I thought, but you were doing,
right.
You were getting over COVID. You were doing what you needed to do to actually get past the illness so you can move on. And I think that speaks to modern culture's manic message about productivity and why sometimes we can have such a hard time slowing down enough to really engage these moments of stuckness or to do the work that we needed to do, which in your case was none of the work that you normally do, and to have to really downshift so you could slow down and get through the thing. And I think there's a prevailing narrative in culture that you've got to be moving. You've got to be 10Xing. You've got to be go. And on the one hand, you could even say my podcast is about that because I'm saying, hey, you are going to die, so get after it. And if there's any inclination that I'm proposing that, please let's dispel that now and say that sometimes the way to get after it in life is to slow down, especially in these moments of stuckness. And that's something that's popping up for me really, really clearly in this conversation, even more so than when I did the first episode, was just the importance of slowing down when we start to see these indicators on the dashboard of our lives that are indicating stuckness, much like we would do if suddenly the oil light came on our engine. Any of us who know what the oil light means would know something critical is going on in the engine. Pull over and take a look. Now, maybe our version of stuckness is not the oil light. Maybe it's just a temperature reading or something that's less critical. But I think, if we were to outline, what's the first step? Well, when it shows up, slow down and see what it's there for.
It's interesting. It makes me think of a story, and you know this, but your listeners don't. But I've been in this world of Baja motorcycle racing for several years, and we've got a team of guys, and so I manage the team. I don't race myself, but there's maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 guys that race. And one of the things that I've found over the years is that the guy who is the fastest rider oftentimes is also the worst rider. And what I mean by that is we've got a guy on the team. I won't mention any names. He'll know who he is when he hears this. But that he's fast. I mean, the dude is fast, and he takes a lot of risks, and he just goes and goes and goes. And if we've done 14 or 15 races together, he has massively crashed in 7 of those races. And he has ended his race in 1 or 2 of those races. Why? Well, because he is going too fast. He is hustling too much. He is trying to make up too much time. Classic answer, classic question he would ask when we're doing a bike handoff is, how far am I behind the next guy? Which we've come to understand is probably the death knell. That's a question we don't want to be asking when we're racing.
Yeah.
Here's what we need to know. If Andrew is the racer, Andrew, you tend to race at this pace. If you race at 85, or this tends to be the speed that you can go. If you race at 85% of that, you're going to beat the guy who's trying to go to 86 or 90% of that.
Bam, paradox.
In
soccer, when you're trying to hit a low driving ball on goal, we were always taught, hit it at 85% of your max effort. Because anything above that, your form goes badly. You start shooting wide or high. You take your eye off the ball when you go to make contact. And I think in marksmanship, there's a saying that applies to many other areas. What do they say? Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And I think you're saying a similar thing here. And so if we're inclined to believe, hey, I can't slow down for these moments of stuckness, I'm going to power through, then I would say, okay, and you're going to revisit it in another day, another week, another month, and you're going to have to do it all over again. Until at some point, that lesson that the stuckness is there for builds to a critical point where you have to pay attention to it. And I've had those moments. I mean, the story of why we got out here to Colorado is an indicator of that, because there was this stuckness in my life. I mean, building over 14 years, and it wasn't all 14 years of stuckness, but there were ingredients of the stuckness that were building over 14 years to a critical point where finally the pain of that stuckness was enough that I turned around and looked at it and began to learn what it was there for. And that allowed us then to leave that nest and to come to a place that we wanted to be, doing things that were more aligned with the kind of people that we are anyway. Now, in hindsight, I can see, gosh, maybe it would have been better 7 years before that to have been able to. Now, I don't know that I could have done it any differently, but with that, the benefit of that lesson in my rearview mirror, I now can take that experience and apply it to the next episodes of stuckness that I will inevitably experience and go. And I've heard Lewis Howes say this before, and he may not have been his thing, but he said, have hindsight now. If I just pause and slow down now and take some time to digest what the stuckness is here to teach me, then I'll actually be able to accelerate from this point more quickly into the life that I want. So slow is smooth and smooth is fast. I think EMS responders use that kind of thing. You never see firefighters on scene or EMS personnel on scene running. And if you do, they're not following their training, or they're running from a flaming log that's going to fall on them. That's appropriate. But you just don't see them moving quickly because I understand that.
It's interesting. In mountain biking, there's a maxim very similar, and it says, instead of taking the smooth way fast, take the fast way smoothly, which simply requires you to do things like rely on your form, keep your line appropriate, all the things that you know anyways. But it just reminds you that if there's a bunch of rocks in front of you and the smooth way is around this rock to the left and then back around this rock to the right, well, maybe it's okay to smoothly loosen your body up a little bit, loosen your form up a little bit, and just go straight over the middle. Maybe that's okay too, So I think that's always in my mind, the idea of just being with where you're at and not trying to correct your way out of it all the time.
Yeah.
That's the major mistake that most pilots make when they have bad crashes. Is they're trying to correct their way out of something that's happened. Now, here's what we know. In most cases, not all cases, but in most cases, what happens when you let go of the controls of an airplane? It still wants to fly.
Right.
And so if we just slow down, be with it, rely on the fact that we've been here before, then we tend to put ourselves in a better place for action.
Totally. And it's just so counterintuitive. Again, it's paradoxical. And we're just in a culture in the West, I think, that preaches muscle your way through it, keep going. And it's not that there are some hard things that we want to muscle our way through. To your point earlier about being uncomfortable on the bike riding, yeah, it's just uncomfortable. And if I want to ride 100 miles on a bike, I got to get used to this discomfort. So keep riding. But we're not talking about those moments merely. We're talking about when stuckness shows up in a way that we realize can teach us. First, we've got to be aware of what's happening, and then slow down, take responsibility, tap into the negative energy, the frustration, the anger, etc. And in theories of human learning, they often talk about cognitive dissonance. And I hope I don't have a PhD in this stuff, but I hope I'm using it correctly. Cognitive dissonance is there when, and what cognitive dissonance is, in my armchair quarterback understanding, is simply we realize mentally there's a gap between where we are and where we'd like to be or need to be in order to have some level of mastery and a skill or a field of knowledge. And if we didn't have that cognitive dissonance, we wouldn't have motivation to cross that gap, to get from here to quote there. And so realizing that if we didn't have some of the pain associated with these moments of stuckness and just all of that goes with it, we would lack the motivation to grow. And usually when the stuckness has shown up, it's there to show us something that's of value to us and that's necessary for us. And so changing the way we relate even to these negative emotions when they show up, not trying just to get rid of them, but to realize these things are fueling my way forward in the growth. And while it doesn't mean I get to just act out like a petulant kid to everyone around me, it also means, to your point, stay in it, stay with it, and allow it to pull you forward or to push you forward into the growth curve.
Yeah, it's interesting when people learn to go fast on dirt bikes, for example, or fast in a race car. One of the things that they find more is that we're using less brake and more accelerator, which I think is really interesting, or more coasting, less braking, I think would be probably a better way to say it, is understanding that a lot of things will resolve themselves if we don't put too much input into the controls. And so I think that's a precursor really for action, is allowing, if you will, the plane to stabilize before you make the next turn. Or if you're doing low grip driving, what they say is you want to separate the controls. You don't want to be braking and turning at the same time, or braking and shifting at the same time. You want to separate those, and that has everything to do with this concept of being with where the universe or where the car or the bike or the whatever wants to be. Sorry about that. Wants to be right now, and using that to our advantage so that we're not working on things that don't matter.
Yeah, loosen up. Don't get clenchy. Slow down. See what it's there for. Let's move on to ingredient 5 and the final ingredient, and at least the way we're talking about how to relate to stuckness so that it'll benefit you, and that is just finally get moving with and through the stuckness. What do you have to add on that point?
I think it's interesting. I think there's a couple of types of movement that I think are helpful when we're stuck.
Yeah.
The first is any movement.
Yeah.
Literally, physically getting up, moving your body, moving to a different space, changing state, taking a walk, taking a hike, just any movement in general, just a bit of a pattern interrupt into the spot that we're in. So I think that maybe is the first form of movement or action that I think really helps us get unstuck. But the second, and probably the most important piece of it, which I think really happens in conjunction with a physical movement of self, is this idea of making the actions that you know will move you toward solving the problem. For example, if I break down on the dirt bike and I'm out in the middle of the desert, well, the first thing I probably need to do is check, if I have an accident or crash, you check my body, make sure I'm okay, sit with it a little bit, and then I kind of find my bearings. But if I'm by myself, generally nobody's coming to get me. Back to one of our other points back here, taking responsibility. Mm-hmm. So I need to make action toward something, and that action oftentimes is pushing the bike or moving toward shade or whatever it might be. And so I think the first thing is to sit with it, but literally the very next thing is to make some action toward moving yourself out of it. And that action is never like wishing it would go away.
Yeah.
Oh man, I wish I hadn't hit that cactus, or I wish I wish I wouldn't come on this ride by myself, or I wish. No, it has to do with intention. It's where I'm at now. So everything starts here at the point of the stuckness and moves forward from there. Oftentimes our stuckness is because we wish we weren't somewhere else, or we wish we had made a different decision, or we wish. And so I think if we can, at that point, make intention, so if we can make action with intention toward, then I think we always solve our problem a little bit better. So those are the two types of actions that I'm most interested in. One is physical movement, and the second is action. When you're stuck, Andrew, or when anybody who's listening is stuck, you've been stuck before. You absolutely know, and I know you know because you and I have spent time talking a lot about it. You know that making action toward your stuckness, towards solving that particular stuckness, you always know there's something in there you should do. I'm having a hard time. Gosh, Graveyard Group, a great example. Oh, well, it's not perfectly put together yet, and I don't know what I should do here, and I don't know what I should do there. Well, the answer is it doesn't matter. The answer is move toward it. The answer is launch it. Invite people to it. Because here's what we know. Generally, if we make action, things will work for us. The universe or God or whatever it is that just energy will work to help us keep moving that direction. And so, well, why don't we help those powerful forces along by taking action?
Yeah, totally. And I learned that lesson even more powerfully in the case of the Graveyard Group, because I did want to have, what's kind of the framework and the structure and the branding and this, that, and the other. And those were really just, in hindsight, clever ways of not getting over the starting line, of tricking myself in some ways into not having to risk doing something that I was really interested in doing and thought would be really valuable, but was nervous might not work. And there were simply things that I couldn't know without taking action.
Right.
We like to think that we can project ourselves into the future and foresee all the steps that might be necessary, but often you just simply can't know what you need to know unless you start moving.
Absolutely not. No one who's ever started a business would say, man, I wish I had really thought everything out before I started, because had you thought everything out, you wouldn't start a business.
Right.
Because there's too much there.
Right.
So I believe you often can't pre-solve stuckness.
Right.
You can't create the plan and it's all the step-by-steps and understand and then guarantee yourself that you're going to get out of it. All you can do is move.
It's interesting because the episode of Stuckness I was in when I was writing episode 27, I did many of the things that we've talked about in this episode instinctively because I've been around that block before, and I physically moved. I got out of the house when I realized I was about to be mean to my wife because she was chewing. I mean, can imagine, like it was rude to sit there and chew
chewing
something.
Can be really annoying.
She was not chewing rudely. She was just chewing normally, but the volume was amplified because I was in such a state. To me, I was like, oh, how can she just be happily working along and I'm here stuck? And so thankfully I physically moved, which is what you just highlighted. And then when I got to my destination, which happened to be the little natural hot springs that we have around here, I actually started writing, like you'd said earlier, because I realized something's going on and I'm not clear on what it is, but maybe if I start writing, I'll begin to get some clarity on it. And slowly I did. And I decided for some reason that week to slow down and stay with the stuckness. And I really had never done that way before. And over the course of about a week and a half, I learned a lot of really useful things that changed my mental and emotional game substantially. I'm under no illusion that I'm not going to come back to that. And I've even revisited that moment of stuckness in some ways since then. But I kind of know what it's about and what I need to keep doing for the stuckness to have its benefit, which for me professionally means continue to do certain things in terms of how I acquire clients and how I talk about what I do and X, Y, and Z that I hadn't really seen clearly before and kept taking me back to this place of stuckness. And so, and some people are more hardwired for movement to be an activator than others. Like for me, I tend to think when I'm moving and then I'm able to execute when I quote sit. So I solve problems when I'm moving. I become aware of what problems need solving when I'm moving. And then I come up with solutions to them while I'm moving. And then I kind of come back to quote sit and put them into action. Not everybody's wired the same way, but if you are feeling stuck, for sure, don't stay there. Like literally wherever you are in that moment, don't stay there. Just move a little bit.
Well, I think it's interesting that one of the actions that you took towards your last episode of Stuckness was to start writing about, thinking about, and talking about stuckness.
Yeah.
And I think my sense is the concept of helping others or sharing with others a path or something along those lines really helps us understand in ourselves. There's kind of this third person. If I were to,
That's right.
one of the questions that my wife asks me, and I don't use my wife very often as a sounding board for coaching things, but every now and then I'll use that. She says to me, well, what would you tell yourself to do?
Right.
And that to me is such a great little pattern interrupt for me to go, well, duh, I would tell myself to do blah, 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 and to do this, and to do, and then she's very astute and says, well, then do that.
It's such proof that moments of stuckness are so holistically compromising that, you who know very well how to help other people move through stuckness and how to diagnose origins of stuckness, and who see intuitively very clearly some things that other people don't see very easily, and I can too, get in those moments where we just become wholly compromised and hijacked by our own version of stuckness. That's a great self-diagnostic. It's just like, well, what would I tell someone else to do? And I should do that thing. You're like, oh crap, I got to do it.
And that's where the stuckness comes in, right? Is then we actually have to do it.
Yeah.
And that's where this last step here that you've got, this last ingredient of act, is we go, okay, because oftentimes we can talk ourselves into what we should do about it. But then our inner weenie comes out and we're like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to.
Is that a technical term?
Yeah, totally. But it comes out and we just don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And so, oftentimes doing hard things, not even oftentimes, most of the time, doing hard things for the sake of the fact that they're hard is a good enough reason to do them.
Yeah.
And so we don't have to feel good to do the hard thing. I've got a client I've worked with for a number of years, and one of the things he used to say to me was, if I could just, and then insert whatever, if XYZ could just happen, then I would be okay.
Yeah.
If I could just feel better about it, then. And what I would say to him is, bro, I don't think that matters. I think you just need to begin action toward it. If I were to prescribe to you the action and say to you, this is what you should do in this step by step by step, you would say to me, yeah, that makes sense. And then you would add a but.
Right.
So what actually in that case helped us in his coaching was he said to me, how come we always talk about this, Chad? We always talk about this. And I said to him, if you want to stop talking about this thing, then you have to take the actions that we've talked about.
Yeah.
So we can go talk about something else.
Yeah.
Then I think you said something else important, and that's that. And it's really important that we understand this. Stuckness is just a temporary state.
Right.
And we're going to go through it over and over and over and over again in big ways, in small ways. And so just understanding that really that battle, that obstacle, if you will, from Ryan Holiday is the way. That identifying and being able to move through challenging parts of life is just kind of one of the fun parts.
Yeah.
And if we look at what is the pain that we want versus what is the pain we want to avoid, then all of a sudden we can start moving more quickly towards what we want. And we can look at things like just super fun opportunities. None of us wants to do a 24-piece children's puzzle anymore. None of us. Like when my kid brings out the 24-piece puzzle, I have a 20-year-old son that's autistic. He doesn't even want to do the 24-piece puzzle anymore. Why? Because it's not hard enough.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, let's make a bigger puzzle. Let's embrace the thing being a little bit more challenging.
Beautiful. Really well said. There was a lot in there. The final piece about action that I think is important is not only when you find yourself stuck, get moving, take action. It's as you take action in the middle of the stuckness and you begin to gain clarity about what the stuckness is there for, begin to take action on that.
Yes.
So that minimally you avoid future episodes of stuckness in the same way. You're able to grow through that stuckness. So take action on whatever is revealed to you. Maybe you've become clear that you need to apologize to your life partner for some particular behavior of yours over time, and you've been unwilling to do that, and now's the time. If that's the thing, do that thing. So that, it may come back around in some form, that version of stuckness later on, but you have evolved beyond where you were before.
That's great. Yeah, that's so great. There's a young man comes to mind that I work out in the gym with, and he had some back problems. He's younger, he's 26, 27, and he had some back problems, and he's a big dude, and he was a former lifter. And I lifted next to him in the rack next to him a lot, and he came over to me and he said, "Hey, Chad, can you spot me on this?" And it was a weight that he definitely could lift. Like, there was no concern about it. He's a strong dude. He could definitely lift it. And he said, I haven't lifted this weight in a long time, and it's feeling a little bit scary. Like, he's a really astute kid to like even say it that way.
Yeah.
I said, well, great. Let's put 10 more pounds on and see what happens. And the look on his face was like, what do you mean 10 more pounds? Well, so let's say that number, he was squatting 135 pounds, let's say, and because he was worried about his back. Well, now, just last week, as he continued to kind of add stress into the situation and put a little bit more weight on because he could, not because he was stronger necessarily, but because he was pressing into the situation, he came to me the other week and said, Chad, my working weight on that squat is now 205 pounds. And he says, and that's because when I was lifting 100, and he was lifting 135 for 4 months or something, like a long time. It's because we started stretching in and taking action toward the thing he had fear of, which was hurting his back again by lifting. He took action again toward that. All of a sudden, he's just moving way past that stuff. Now he doesn't even do, like, 185 pounds is probably his warm-up weight, whereas 135 was scary for him before. So once we start stretching into the stuff and we start taking action toward it, then all of a sudden those limits, the bar that we're hopping over, that's an easy bar to hop over anymore.
That's so good. That was great coaching in the moment too. Holy smoke. I mean, great coaching. So I hope, and clearly you guys are seeing the quality of coach that Chad is and his ability to understand human nature. And that's what we're here talking about, really, is, to me, stuff that on the one hand is sometimes hard to get a grasp on or to wrap our brains around, but this is eminently practical. This is the stuff of life as a human on planet Earth. And when we begin to master, and I don't mean fully master in some Yoda way, but just when we begin to wrap our heads around what the real work of life is, it is much more this stuff than it is all of the other stuff. The things that people can see in our lives on a daily basis, that's visible to them, is the result of who we are internally and how we're showing up to the game of life. So this topic of stuckness is really part of the real work of life, the most substantial work of life, and how we navigate these episodes and how we relate to discomfort and all these kinds of things. And, the phrases you were bringing up, Chad, I wish, and if only, come to mind as we land this plane, is like that. Whenever we find ourselves in a place of stuckness, for whatever reason, if we start saying that kind of stuff, it's a good indicator that we're starting to fall into victimhood and to blame basically our situation on external circumstances. And certainly external circumstances exist, but when we begin to blame them for our well-being, now we are fully in the victim seat and fully in the victim mode
100%.
And taking ourselves out of the game and saying that we've got to wait until other things align in order to move. And Chad and I want to say the very opposite today. When you find yourself stuck, okay, good. It's time to figure out what the stuck is there for and begin to do something with it and to move through it. Any final burning thoughts for you, Chad, on this topic before we sign off?
I don't have a lot more than what we just talked about. I think we covered a lot. I think that if people take nothing else away from the episode than the fact that you can't think your way out of stuckness, that you have to act your way out of stuckness, I think that would be valuable. And I think it's just super important that we understand that the brain and our ability to puzzle and piece this together is limited, and it needs help from the body and from our actions. It needs the help. And I think that if we give it that help, then we can move more quickly towards a resolution.
If you're stuck, get moving. Chad, thanks for being here, man. That was a fun conversation for me, and I think it's going to benefit a lot of people. I hope we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, man, I really appreciate it and enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
Remember to check out Chad's new Mavericks project. I think many of you out there can benefit from it. He's, again, offering a special bonus to all of the listeners of Andrew Petty is Dying. Just enter code Andrew when you go to sign up at carrynobrand.com. Also, I'll have in the show notes ways to connect with Chad apart from the Mavericks thing, just to track with what he's doing and connect with him. And finally, remember, you are going to die, but you are not dead yet. So get after it. If you're stuck, get moving. I hope this episode has helped you evolve your relationship with stuckness, our challenging but normal and necessary companion in life. A big part of what I do as a coach is help others move through their stuckness to achieve the transformation that's available on the other side. I can help you do that. Connect with me on Facebook or Instagram at Andrew Petty Coach. Visit digdeepwinbig.com or email me at andrew@digdeepwinbig.com. To learn more about Graveyard Group Masterminds, where we make time each week to invest in your life's most important work, visit digdeepwinbig.com/the Graveyard Group. I'm so glad you tuned in today. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time on Andrew Petty is Dying.